Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
And welcome to the Regis Center for Art. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Howard Oransky, and I am director of the Katherine E. Nash Gallery here in the Department of Art. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Minnesota sits on land that was stolen from the Dakota people by the government of the United States. The treaties of 1805, 1837, and 1851, through which the U.S. government claimed ownership, were riddled with fraud, deception, and coercion. In 1856, the U.S. Senate's Military Affairs Committee concluded that the 1805 treaty was, quote, never promulgated, nor can it now be found upon the statute books, like any other treaty, if indeed a treaty it may be called, nor were its stipulations ever complied with on the part of the United States, unquote. This information, along with additional supporting evidence documenting the theft of this land, can be found in an article written by Neil McKay and Monica Seams McKay for the Institute of Advanced Study here at the University of Minnesota. We are here to celebrate the exhibition, A Picture Gallery of the Soul, which is currently up in the Katherine E. Nash Gallery through December 10th. The Picture Gallery of the Soul has been made possible by the generous support of the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Philip and Edith Leonian Foundation, an early and critical gift by Kate Nelson and Stuart Nelson, in-kind support provided by Metropolitan Picture Framing and Blue Dot, and the Gibbons Foundation for African American Literature. I'm also grateful to our donors Jane Bassick, Harriet Bart, and Bruce Bart, and Mary Baumgartner. The Katherine E. Nash Gallery and the University of California Press have co-published the exhibition catalog, which includes images by the exhibition artists and brilliant essays by Cheryl Finley, A.M. Crystal Nelson, Seth Rodney, and Deborah Willis. We have reference copies of the catalog in the gallery, and you can purchase it from your favorite bookseller. Our program this afternoon is the fourth and, I would say, unfortunately, the last in a series of events related to the exhibition. All these events are presented with the technical expertise of our media staff. My thanks to Karen Hazelman, Adam Kerrigan, and Theo Collette. I would also like to thank our assistant curator, Therese Iacovino, our graduate teaching assistants, Sarah Hubner-Burns and Nick Nurburn, and our undergraduate intern, Catherine Blommel, for their help with the exhibition and the related events. In 2016, I invited my colleague, independent curator Herman J. Milligan, Jr., to join me as co-curators of the exhibition, A Picture Gallery of the Soul. Fortunately for me, he agreed, and we have been working together on this project for the last 6 years. And I'll just say it's been a labor of love from day one right up to the very end. Herman is a collector and a curator of photography. He is the acting director of the Gibbons Foundation for African American Literature, and he serves on the boards of just about every arts organization in the Twin Cities. In addition to curating the exhibition with me, Herman curated the soundscape of over 100 musical selections, each one corresponding to a specific artwork in the exhibition catalog. The soundscape is accessed on the headphones in the gallery, and the playlist is included in the gallery guide, which is available to you in the gallery, free. I also want to thank Herman for taking the lead organizing today's program. And I want to thank our wonderful speakers for sharing their insights with us. Please welcome Herman J. Milligan, Jr.
Thank you, Howard, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for being here this afternoon, as well as our distinguished panel who will be doing some who will be reading based on their interpretation of the work. First, I'd like to introduce Mary Moreister. She is a 2020 recipient of an Artist Initiative grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board and Canem, Alumni Fellow, is the author of 4 poetry books, free papers, poems inspired by the testimony of Eliza Winston, a Mississippi slave freed in Minnesota in 1860. That book was published in 2021. The Body of the World, which was the Minnesota Book Award and Poetry Finalist in 2019. Walking from Origins and From the Flutes of Our Bones 2020. Twice nominated for a Pushcart Prize. She is also founder and director of the Carleton's College Dance Program. A born rule breaker, Easter was raised in Pittsburgh, Virginia, where her parents were on the faculty of Virginia State College, now University, in a talented family of musicians and educators. While working with the dance program at Carleton, Easter met prominent visiting teachers who helped her make contacts in New York. Somehow she managed to move back and forth between Northville and the high-level studios in the East. Finally, she was an independent dancer choreographer who called on her Black heritage while embracing the new modern dance movement. She danced to other people's choreography and to her own, accompanied by music written by her musician mother. Multi-talented Easter founded and directed Carleton's dance program at the same time, and she was a Canem Fellow at the Foundation for African American Poetry. She has won awards in poetry and dance and is now the Ray Shukpak Nathan Professor of Dance and the Performing Arts Emerita at Carleton, where the dance studios are actually dedicated to her. So please welcome our first speaker, Mary Moreister, and then I will introduce the other two as well. Thank you. Oh, no, you don't. I'm going to let me just take. Yeah, right. And then Mary Moreister, I've known her for a very long time. Just last night, she was over at Majors and Quinn doing a reading up like of her book, The Way She Wants to Get There, Telling on Myself. There you have it. G.E. Patterson. G.E. Patterson's debut poetry collection, Tug, was called brilliant and praised for its elegantonian master of many voices by the Washington Post. Tug was also honored by the Academy of American Poets and received the Minnesota Book Award, New York City's Fund for Poetry, hailed to and from for its contributions to literature. Patterson was a featured poet performer with celloist Nioki Workman in New York City's Panasonic Village Jazz Fest. Patterson is a past University of Minnesota Ellenstein Keller Fellow in Creative Writing and has held fellowships from the McDowell Colony, the De Gerazi Resident Artist Program, and Canem. So we have two Canem people here. Patterson began large-scale public art activities under artist Setu Jones, who happens to be in the audience, on Jones' food justice conversation, Create the Community Meal. He was part of Plume Project via Emily Stover's Eco-Conscious Rumblings, a sound, text, steam, and light work centered in downtown St. Paul. For Civic Women, Community Visions, Patterson worked in collaboration with 8 other artists over 2 years to honor the civic achievements of 11 women in a rural area of the Czech Republic. Patterson was one of 3 artists commissioned to work on the Dale Street Bridge replacement. This project's structural, aesthetic, sculpture, and text-based work are a response to the intentional fracturing of St. Paul's Roundup community by the construction of Interstate 94. Patterson writes and comments frequently on the visual arts, often focusing on site-specific and site-responsive work. He is a contributing writer for Places Journal, a California-based journal on contemporary architecture, landscape, and urbanism. In a 2021 essay for Places, he recognized the heterotopic community at the site of the George Floyd killing. He is currently developing an essay on archiving Black life. He's teaching 2020 through 2022 crisis, critical resistance, and creative resilience through the State Silk Museum in Tbilisi, Georgia, and the Art Prospect Network. He was recently named guest dramaturg at the Tanz Theater Munster. Please welcome G.E. Patterson. Thank you. Davu Seru, a native of the Twin Cities, is an improvising musician and composer. He's worked with numerous improvising musicians and composers throughout the United States and France, including Anthony Cox, Nilo Fine, George Cartwright, Nirmala Rajit Sekar, Douglas Ewart, Michelle Kenny, Dean McGraw, Paul Metzger, Evan Parker, J. Otis Powell, Didier Petit, Mankui Ndosi, Jack Wright, Babatunde Leah, Nathan Hansen, Raphael Toral, Donald Washington, Catherine Delaney, Louis Ale Hayu, Tacumba Aiken, Tony Hamos, and Nicole Mitchell. He is co-author with photographer Charles Chambliss of the book Sight, Sound, Soul, The Twin Cities Through the Lens of Charles Chambliss, Minnesota Historical Society Press 2017, and he's a co-author of a forthcoming book on artist Setu Jones. For the year 2017-2018, he served as a composer in residence at Studio Z in St. Paul. He's curated concert series for over the past 20 years and has received awards from the McKnight Foundation, where he was a 2020 composer from the Jerome Foundation, between 27 and 18 composer sound artists, the American Composers Forum, where he was a Minnesota emerging composer, the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council Next Step Fund, and he has received commissions from the Zeitgeist Ensemble and Walker Art Center. In addition, Davu is a published author and is assistant professor of practice in the Department of English at Hamlin University. His music related to this exhibition can be found on our soundscape, which accompanies this exhibition. It's track 90 with Katherine Delaney, is that correct? And Guillaume Seguran, and it's titled For Women. And it's related to photography, and it's related to the photograph by Carl Robert Pope Jr. You can also access the sound on the Spotify under a picture gallery of the soul title track 90. So thank you, and welcome you all.
Good afternoon. I was very fortunate to come to this exhibition at the time that I was exploring photographs for my book. I want to say, first of all, that I'm not a photographer, and I don't think that I have a particularly sophisticated idea of photography. I'm interested in the information it conveys, and the information is not always straightforward. There's much to be seen. So when I was walking here a couple of months ago, thinking that I need to take it in, I need to let it roll around in my consciousness before I have to be on this panel, there were a marked couple of responses I had. The first was that in so many of the portraits, the subject seemed to be poised for conversation. The direct gaze connected me with the time, the person, and the person who had, I don't want to say staged, but who had made this photograph. And I recognized I have lived long enough that my early years have become history. And so I was walking through my own history in this way, and it was very personal to me what both professional photographers and the person on the street whose photographs were represented, what they had chosen to give. That's a general statement, but I will tell you that the whole time I was waiting to see if I was going to encounter Carrie Mae Weems, whose photographs, whose triptych, the Kitchen Table series, I had seen some years before. And I had written about it, and I felt this anticipation growing as I walked through the exhibit that, is it going to be here? Am I going to see it? Is that conversation going to be continued? And that sort of, it really affected my sense of the whole thing, that I was going to see a friend. And would I respond in the same way? Would I have something different to tell her? Back to the books. I realized that the covers of my last two books were both photographs, okay? And one is an actual photograph that's of me that seemed, I knew that I wanted it on the cover of my book. It is about a past me that is still alive, but not doing that, all right? And there's, of course, there are stories attached to that. So that's one thing. The other one is a composed photograph. And the designer at Noden Press sort of followed my directions. I sent him a series of old photographs that I had that represent members of my family, ancestry, and since that is one of the themes of what I'm writing and one of the sources of what I write, I thought it would be great. He tried several covers, and I kept looking for something that grouped them. And I did not want one particular person to stand out, because the Book of Poems is not about one person, it's about a community of people related to each other. As I am saying this, I am thinking about how that is so often true. These pictures, this book is about these pictures, okay? The output does not easily narrow itself into one volume, one document. And so here I am with a composite, and you can't see this, but this couple in the corner, these are my parents, and these are my parents before they knew they could have children. I'm the child, okay? I just want to say that's quite a realization for me to have. Had the picture a long time, admired it, but never realized that that was the significance. And then here's a picture of my father's mother, whom I knew well, even though she lived far away from us. We lived in Virginia, she lived in Massachusetts. Here is a picture of my grandmother, my mother's mother. Wait a minute, I've skipped over somebody, but anyway, my mother's mother, this photograph is a photograph of her history. She is the almost white-skinned person who is a mother of this brown-skinned woman. Why? Well, that's the history, all right? That's the history. Here is my mother's father, the subject of the railroad poems and my mother's piano poems. And here is a picture of me with my two daughters, okay? And I know that this was on the first birthday of my youngest child, so I can date that photograph. As a background or a source for the poems contained, this photograph, this composite photograph, represents something that the viewer cannot know, all the details. And yet, for me, it is a gathering together, the visual gathering together of the source of my life, my place in my culture. Now, back to the dance photograph. On my way to thinking about photographs and what importance they have had in my artistic output, which is varied but does not include expert photography, either making it or studying it. One of the things I realized in my book is that, like presentation of all the arts, there are requirements of the art. There are demands that the art makes. Good paper is one of them. The actual means of making the art is dependent on things like knowledge and money. Money comes into it all the time. Can you finance this art form, the demands of this art form? Okay. I don't think I have been so successful with that. I don't want to tell you, when I'm trying to sell my book, I don't want to tell you that, oh, the paper, oh dear, I never looked into that. All right, but I will admit that for now. Okay, so back to the writing I've done that is about photographs. This is a selection. And this particular thing that I'm going to read is from The Way She Wants to Get There, Telling on Myself. It's the second chapter, and I'm writing about the dance classes I was taken to as a very young child. And there is a photograph at that first dance class here. I want to read what I wrote about it. The photograph taken at my very first session at the Wells School of Dancing shows a tall 4-year-old anchoring the middle of the back row. My arms are overhead in a bent curve, my legs twisted so that one heel rests on the toe of the other foot. I was trying to achieve a brand new 5th position. My eyes are wide with the concentration that holding this shape requires. The towering architecture of modern dance, that's how we used to talk, okay, that would later wow me in my Carleton classes was not on my mind. On my left, Carolyn made a similar effort. On my right, Jean, never again seen in a dance class that I can recall. We three are the tall members of the class, dazed beyond belief, eyebrows lifted, frozen by the photographer in a staged and startled moment. The short ones are in front. Cousin Sandra smiles at the camera with a lifted arm and a right foot pointed at the floor in front of her. And Jackie smiles her honey dripper smile. Judy, her sister and my best friend, is upside down in a backbend we all envy. No one has taught it to her. She just knows how to do it. These were the days when life was all one thing, black on black, like the haze of hair around a baby's head. Life was woolly and close. Life was in, among, alongside. Without having that old photograph, I would not have made the effort to describe what it said to me, to direct your eye to particular aspects beyond just the image at the time. And that was true of many of the photographs that I selected and then, for various reasons, had to limit or discard. Moving on, I have two poems. One is called Photograph, Virginia State College Academic Procession, 1945. Giant trees claw the ground, branches leaf in high canopy over black-clad black faculty, paused inside a world they made, where no limb will ever bear the burden of a hanging black body. This is a landscape with huge arching trees and a tiny line of faculty. And the meaning of this photograph is not just in the beauty of the arrangement, the enormity of the trees, the sheltering nature of the trees, but it is in the world that was made by this tiny line of Black people, creating an educational institution where whatever the difficulties, whatever the circumstances they met, this was a thing that was never going to happen. No Black body was going to hang from any of those limbs. So now we come to our conversation with Carrie Mae Weems. And this poem is newly titled Song of Wonder. And the setup is that it seems to me that what happens with the direct gaze or with the setting portrayed in the photographs is sometimes so meaningful to the watcher that they think it's them. It's only them. It's not representative of a whole group of people. So the woman here who wants to talk to Carrie Mae has taken these photographs very personally, and she wants to tell her about it. Carrie Mae, I have been that woman in your picture at the kitchen table, looking so composed, straight out of her eyes, while he reads the paper, his glass of scotch ready for the next swallow. Did you know you were putting my business in the street with that photo? I have been that woman thinking so hard about the impasse he's not even aware of while he reads his paper, feeling so hard that I couldn't know I looked noble in profile, a proud woman like an Egypt, and so contained. Carrie Mae, did you know you were exposing the heart I hid? And did you know, Carrie Mae, that I have stood against the wall in the shadows outside his circle of light, figuring out what to do next, and how, if it's the two of us, it's not just up to him to change or take the next step. I could do it again. Leave the solid wall under the clock, step toward his light at his table. And Carrie Mae, I guess it could have been somebody else, but you must have known it was only me. I have been the woman who put her arms around him after hard thinking, who bent over his lowered head and circled him in his light while he read the paper. And when he reached one hand up to touch my circling arms, I have been the woman who thought it was almost enough this time. You must have known me to make this picture. Now, I know I'm supposed to be standing back, noticing your choice of black and white, the formal qualities of composition, the grain you chose to display, and how you kept it all so close. And I see it. I swear I do. But when all that has been checked off, and I am looking at your pictures, is that I have been that woman and you knew me, and still you put my business in the street for everybody to see. Thank you very much.
Hello. I'm going to open with a poem, and then I'm going to offer some thanks. So this is probably the shortest poem I'll read today. It's titled Poem Without a Title. A shadow rises from the pile of leaves I made, and it follows me. What I learned from Professor Deborah Willis, what I learned from Mary Easter, is how much history and personal experience shapes this exhibition. My thanks to the Katherine E. Nash Gallery and the university's Department of Art, to the exhibition's organizers, Herman Milligan Jr. and Howard Oransky, director of the Nash. My thanks to the staff of the Nash and the Regis Center for the Arts. My thanks also go to the exhibition sponsors and to the poets here today. I am glad and grateful to be here. Mary Easter and Davu Seru, I thank you for your company now and for your company in the community. I've arranged my minutes as a poetry reading, trying to respond to some of the themes that Professor Deborah Willis announced, also responding to the talk that Professor Cheryl Friendly gave more than a month ago now. One of the things that strikes me about the exhibition, A Picture Gallery of the Soul, is, as Mary said, the sense of personal history, but also the responsiveness of so many of the photographs to the work of other photographers, other artists, other people. And I've tried to select, I hope to present poems that will give you a sense of that in language. For Sean Hill, talking to me might be a waste of breath. Work, Langston Hughes. The Bird Wood, Russell Atkins. When there's a bird bright on the other side of the glass in winter, warming itself in sunlight, 9 a.m., a bare spirea branch for footing, I hush, listen to it. I would bring all my attention to that moment. That may be all that I will know. Today, in the kingdom of happiness, a bird sang, in regret or celebration. I placed my hand on the pane for a minute. The possibility could carry me into the afternoon or early evening. I might feel myself called back by that song. I know the smudged finger marks will be there, song inside my head, eyes wet, a truth rising. And I am grateful, though the world is not a mirror for my life. There is the bird, shaking, hungry. It's still there, past the time it could have left. I know. I am that bird. Maybe some of you have spent enough time in New York City and are fans of the radio, and you know the radio station WBLS, often called BLS. The W signifies that the station is located east of the Mississippi River. It is what used to be called a black radio station, now categorized as urban adult contemporary. This poem is titled BLS, and it honors a woman who's named in the poem. I heard it on the radio today that Betty Shabazz is dead, that she died yesterday at 3 p.m. in the Bronx. I'm walking in a city where it's news that Betty Shabazz died, that she died yesterday, and I'm talking to the woman behind the sandwich counter. She is black. We say, I didn't know. I heard the news on the radio this morning. We mourn the dead woman. We don't know what it means that Betty Shabazz is dead, that she died yesterday. One paper summed up her life as Malcolm X's widow. Only woman I ever thought about loving, he said. A quote, more than 32 years old now. Betty Shabazz survived 22 days with burns over 3/4 of her body. Betty Shabazz survived 32 years without the great rebellious Mr. X. Betty Shabazz survived Hoover and Nixon, Reagan and Bush. Betty Shabazz survived 5 of Ed Koch's and Rudy Giuliani's campaigns for a brighter, whiter New York. Betty Shabazz survived all that, and death has not stilled her. Betty Shabazz is shouting, they are killing my husband. It's her voice on the radio. She's crying. Phone calls flood the station. People are grieving that Betty Shabazz is dead, that she died yesterday. It's all over the radio. For a long while, my poems have had quotes or text above the title of the poem, often between the title and the body of the poem, sometimes in the side margins, sometimes below the close of the poem. This is a version of one of those. The title is a quote from the poet Caroline Crumpacker. And then there are 2 epigraphs, one from Thomas Hardy and one from Carl Phillips. Title, Glib Pirouette Out of Messiness, Caroline Crumpacker. Hoping, Thomas Hardy. Weakness, Carl Phillips. How do we long to think in terms of wholes? See that words don't fall to the ground together. Start across the uneven field of grass, one of us says, meaning the other should. Perhaps one interest is something like safety. Hold my hand so I can look at the stars. What is at the other end of a feeling? Science. Between 2 poles, a current, grammar. Hold my hand, I want to look at the stars. All this is too large to be seen at once. The old life and now have their own effects. Shift to grade school, 6th grade, being a girl. Will you go with what you have or invent? Trust in the future, in your loneliness. It's been my practice for a proper amount of time to cover at least one poem by someone else if I give a reading. This is the first poem in poet Forrest Hamer's first book. The title of this poem is My Luck. His book is titled Call and Response. My luck. I could be another body. It could be 1995 or 1959. Or I could live in a time not all that specific. Lying on the grass last Sunday, or maybe when I was 5, I felt the ground pulling at me. Apparently, the body has some responsibility. It plants itself as memory whose accuracy is doubtful. I could be another. It could be tomorrow. The earth was pulling and my body laid out straight. Remembered falling asleep in the afternoon, drunk with play and questions. A find of the four-leaf. I was lucky all over again, born when I was, to whom and where. I was having a good life, a birthday, the day answering to me. No one I loved had died yet, not my grandmother who went first and quick, not my brother, not the others. The breathing of the ground roused me, grass flooding the nostrils and marking for itself my face. I woke up belonging somewhere, not yet able to move for fear I would disturb what was still sleeping. And I'm going to close with a poem dedicated to Michael Harper. It's titled Cool Daddy. In his other life, my father loved music. More than me, he loved the hard bebop sounds Horace Silver would pull from an upright, Bud Powell, sharp two-handed finger rolls, the whoosh, 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 when Dizzy blew through town. When he'd walk, he'd hum the Bird of Prey blues, let Hawkins set the rhythm of his strut, parade down Main Street and make people wonder what in hell he was trying to say, dragging his tired left foot behind the beat. Some men understand movement's innuendo. Charlie Parker, Art Blakely, Sonny Rollins know a stiff leg can counterpoint black cool. Know each step they take can tell the whole story better than they could any other way. If he'd wanted to use words, he would have lived a different life. He might have loved me the way he loved music, 24/7. He might have fathered me through a piano, a saxophone, trombone, or pocket horn. I might have been the reason the man whistled, slapped his thighs, or kept 2 spoons in his coat. I might have been the invisible hi-hat he hit when he wasn't thinking of dying. Might have been the song spinning in his head. He raised me on Underground's easy street. He willed me his off-center sense of timing, gave me a metaphor riddled with sadness. Thelonious Monk taught him, and he taught me, silence is the tune. We go out singing. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello. Do I have any control of this mic? It's hot, and I don't want that feedback sound to. Thank you. All right. Melanated people know something about capturing light. Melanated people know something about capturing light, and how to and why. So, I've got an array of things here. Sort of a loose score. The rest is just happening right now. So, Bell hooks. In Black Looks reminds us that spaces for agency exist for Black people, wherein we can both interrogate the gaze of the other, but also look back and at one another, naming what we see. In resistance struggle, she goes on, the power of the dominated to assert agency by claiming and cultivating awareness politicizes looking relations. One learns to look a certain way in order to resist. I have a 13-year-old son named August. 2 days ago, said to me, "Dad," "Yes?" "I'm reading Invisible Man." And I smile, and I try to contain my enthusiasm because he might stop reading Invisible Man. And I stand up and I walk him over to a wall in our home, and I point to a photograph by Sage Carroll of Professor John S. Wright in his office over here in the Social Sciences building. And I said, he was my teacher. He knew Ralph Ellison. He wrote a book on Ralph Ellison. I'm able to point at this photograph to make this connection with my 13-year-old son to this history, right? There's continuity between that connects us, right? It was exciting for me to accept this invitation. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just a descendant of Negroes from North Minneapolis, who lives in Frogtown now, and has taken up some work that's increasingly feeling sort of full of purpose. And so when I got the invitation, I said yes, on the strength of this book that I co-authored with Charles Chambliss, who I'll talk about in a second. Last Saturday, I come to the exhibit. I had just come off of a couple days before. I'm also working on some other projects related to photographers, particularly Bill Cotman, whose work we'll be celebrating in January at Homewood Studios in North Minneapolis. And so I come to the gallery here, and the first photo you see, right, is the one that's on the cover of the program. And I say to myself, and to anyone standing close enough to hear me, that's my auntie. Because this is my great-great-aunt, Gloria A. Jackson, photographed by John Glanton, whose photographs live over at the Hennepin County Library, downtown Minneapolis. I know this is my Aunt Glo because late last year, I had been interviewing my great aunt, Joyce Acosta Nee Underwood, who died at 84 back in June. She was hit by a car in Brooklyn Center where she was living. But thankfully, I had gotten her down a couple times and took my recording equipment over to her place in Brooklyn Center, the same house that she and her husband moved into in 1967, integrating Brooklyn Center. She said all these white folks that didn't like one another, Finns and Swedes and Germans and whatnot. And then when they got there, they became white people. But my Aunt Joyce, I went over with this collection of photographs that John Glanton had taken of the Black Twin Cities in the 1940s and 50s, and early 50s. And I'm going through, each photograph, and my great Aunt Joyce is saying, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so, they used to live next to so-and-so, there's so-and-so, and there's your Aunt Joyce, there's your Aunt Glo. That's how I know that's my Aunt Glo, because my Aunt Joyce told me. But the sort of history of photography, so I'm thrilled at the opportunity to connect with the photographs in the exhibit. And I'm struck by the sort of charge that, well, in preparing for this talk, the history of black photography, or photography, photographs taken by black people in the United States, we might liken to sort of a broader sort of autoethnographic process, right? Autoethnography is a self-referential kind of practice wherein the researcher, the person looking, right, is also partially the focus of the analysis, right? The person looking is also partially the focus of the analysis. 2016, 17, 16. I'm over in John Wright's, I'm TAing for John Wright over in his African American literature course here at the U, and we get word that Prince has just died. Everything stops. Everybody stops. Shortly after, I get I'm contacted by the folks at Minnesota Historical Society Press, who had gathered up, had a couple years prior, gathered a collection of photographs that were given to them by Reva Chambliss, who lives in the Brooklands, north of the North Side, daughter of photographer Charles Chambliss. They were interested in putting out a book that focused on, Charles Chambliss had taken a number of photographs of the Minneapolis sound, the music scene from the 70s and early 80s that Prince emerged from, right? This black music community in Minneapolis mostly, primarily. I say, I'll come and look at the photos. They invite me to the archive. I go down, going through I spent, and this in part on the strength of, I spent, when I was here at the U, 5 of 8 years of graduate school at the Givens Collection of African American Literature in the archives. And so I had some relationship to archives. So I'm flipping through, and I go, oh my goodness, they're going through these photographs. There's my auntie, there's my cousin, there's my mom, there's my dad. There are all these places that I remember. I'm 44 years old. I remember the early 80s in North Minneapolis. I remember what Plymouth Avenue used to be like. I remember when black elders were more visible than they are, or they were, especially in the early 90s when I was coming of age. I remember the barbershops and the law office and the bank and King's supermarket and the Northgate roller rink. I remember getting groceries on credit, thanks to Mr. King. And so I go up to the folks at the press and they say, yeah, I'll write the book with Charles Chambliss's photos, right? And so there's this book that came out of it. But coming to the exhibit, I was struck. I mean, when I ran into Bill Cotman's work, and then I saw Charles Chambliss's work, and I saw Tia Simone Garner's work, and I saw some other folks familiar come out of the juxtaposition arts in North Minneapolis, which I was in the sort of first group of in 1995, juxtaposition art students. I felt there was continuity here that we could lay claim to as locals. Much of the work that I've been doing for the last handful of years has been focused on making visible the contributions of black Minnesotans to this place and, you might say, the upper Midwest, right? And so when I took up the work of Sight, Sound, Souls, what I was really trying to do was to situate the photographs of this vernacular photographer, folk photographer, into a broader cultural history, which got me into learning something about the technology. I knew nothing about photography, so I went and talked to Bill Cotman. I also called some people who have a history in the technical. They have a technical understanding of photography, and some of them knew Charles Chambliss because, as they would say, he would come in and his checks would bounce, but we'd give him the photos anyway. We know he'd come back and he'd straighten it out, right? He seemed to be struggling, but we were all interested in what he was doing, and they weren't used to processing photos of black people that were obviously intended to present. They weren't just family photos, but to present black people to a broader audience, right? To a broader audience. So I've been studying in advance of this talk. First place I went was Frederick Douglass's essay from 1861, Lecture on Pictures, which had originally been titled Pictures of Progress. But the folks advertising the talk didn't want to give it that title. They didn't want to print it that way. Pictures of Progress. They didn't want to print that way. So Lecture on Pictures, it was one of four. Right? He had given, he was among the first to theorize the new, on the new form, right? The new form, artistic form. And as we also probably know, he was the most photographed American of the 19th century, Frederick Douglass. So in this essay, the first sustained lecture on photography, he says quite a few things, including the following. Men of all conditions, this is one of the virtues of photography, right? He's espousing the virtues. Men of all conditions may see themselves as others see them. Men of all conditions may see themselves as others see them. And then I thought of Mamie Till. We know Mamie Till, Emmett's mother. Right? I'm thinking about the function that photography has played in Black life. I'm thinking about George Floyd and what it might have been like had we seen Breonna Taylor be killed. What it was like to zoom out, right? What it was like, because I wasn't there yet, many of you were, to see the Vietnam War on television. How else do you get white folks out in the middle of nowhere up and roused around some injustice, right? You show people. You show people. And so we've been gathering evidence. And there's a continuity, right? There is something like a tradition, and the work that Frederick Douglass did in the 19th century helped to create a base. And it would seem, if you walk through this gallery, most of these folks know. They know about this tradition, the continuity that binds us and connects us. One of the things, though, about Douglass's essay, I mean, it's the 19th century. What we would, first of all, American literature hardly exists yet. Something like black photography certainly is going to take a while to develop, right? And so we find that Douglass is primarily talking to white audiences in a way that they would find familiar, right? He likens photography to the ballad, right? An Anglo-Saxon form that is a sort of a way of lamenting the loss of fallen noble figures, right? The ballad is, of course, also the verse form that the blues adapts, right? So he's likening photography to the ballad. He also likens it to music. 19th century scholar Walter Pater, as he's looking back on the Renaissance, tells us that all art aspires to the condition of music. All art aspires to the condition of music. And so Douglass, again, in speaking of the virtues of photography, is marking it as a particularly important technology, obviously, for showing us, again, how black people regard themselves. But he's talking to a very specific audience. We haven't yet accounted for the folks. The Civil War has not ended. Reconstruction has not happened. The migrations haven't happened. And so we haven't had to deal with the folks and the image that they represent, might represent for us, right? We're interested in cleaning ourselves up, though, respectability, right? Putting our best face out there because, well, it's life or death. But one of the things that happens is that people move. Emancipation comes, people move. In the book on Chambliss, I say the following. But the migration of poor, mostly illiterate rural blacks to urban centers also affected the politics of visibility and representation in ways that frustrated the efforts of the established black political class who were trying to do the work to show white America our worthiness. The Great Migration happened in three phases. First came the Southerners after Reconstruction, then the post-World War II crowd, then those like Charles Chambliss here, looking for the opportunity in Lyndon Baines Johnson's Great Society. In all cases, these migrants brought plenty with them from their various regions of origin, much of it impalpable. Like Depression-era projects of Walker Evans and Dorothea Lange, many photographers after the fall of the Black cultural renaissance in Harlem and elsewhere moved from documenting cultural achievements to chronicling economic depression among Black folks who landed in slums after having migrated north. Black writer Richard Wright and white photojournalist Edward Roscom's government-supported pictorial 12 Million Black Voices from '41 provides an unvarnished representation of Black life, if not intending simply to shock white audiences into action, like with the Vietnam War. Wright and Roscom presented plain evidence of the irony in that American dream introduced during the Depression. As Wright wrote, quote, "This text assumes that those few Negroes who have lifted themselves through personal strength, talent, and luck above the lives of their fellow Blacks, like single fishes that leap and flash for a split second above the surface of the sea, are but fleeting exceptions to the vast, tragic school that swims below the depths, against the current, silently and heavily, struggling against the waves of vicissitudes that spell a common life." It helps to see it, yes. But as Susan Sontag explained in On Photography, notwithstanding political motivations, the setting in these photos often spoke for the subjects rather than allowing the subjects to speak for themselves. To be cast as environmentally determined is to be cast as an object of pity and horror, and therefore not fully human. On the other hand, composed portraits of respectable Black citizenry placed the often isolated subject at center, at the command. In Charles Chambliss's photos, churches, nightclubs, city lakes, well-groomed yards, Como Park, hotel rooms, event centers, and street scenes speak of a different sort of subject, a community in full possession of itself. This approach was no doubt meant to contest the other, and this is why we treasure him. Charles Chambliss, quote, "There is only one game in town," he said, "and that is reality." One last thing, two last things. So the Chambliss book is published in 2017, thanks to the folks at Minnesota Historical Society Press. When I was going through the archive, and I said, eventually I'm going to stumble across Mama and Daddy, and sure enough, I do. In a black and white photo, a black and white version of this photo, which had hung in my grandmother's house, and then my mother's, and now mine, that was taken by Charles Chambliss. I had no clue at all. It is the first celebration of Black history in Minnesota, February 1976. It is the drum and bugle team from the Elks on Plymouth Avenue, and my dad's in there, my mom's in there, they were all on the Elks. My great aunt's at the center, the matriarch. And so there's a continuity here that I think is important to talk about. But what I'll leave you with, as it relates, I'm wearing a photograph. Can't see it, but come up and see, take a closer look at the end if you're interested. It is the congregation at Brown's Chapel AME Church in Hastings, Minnesota. It includes members of my family, the Wallaces, who came to Minnesota in 1862 as the United States government is waging war on the Dakota, as the Civil War is raging on in the South, because the patriarch killed a white man. We got this in my family a couple different times in our history. He killed a white man who refused him water in this case. And he received safe passage to Minnesota thanks to the 3rd Infantry, which is typically housed at Fort Snelling. They were in the South doing work on behalf of the war effort, the Union's war effort. They give my family safe passage to settle on Dakota land. And they do so with a handful of other Black families in Hastings who build a church, because that's one of the things we do first, right? Need somewhere to meet. That church would be burned down in 1907. There's one mention of it in the newspaper, and this is the photograph that attended that mention. And they said it was likely the act of incendiaries, because they found kerosene thrown against the wall, et cetera. The Klan had a large presence in Hastings. By around 1920, most of the Black families had left Hastings and wouldn't begin to return at least. Black people wouldn't begin to settle in Hastings again until the 1960s. There are many of us doing the work to make that story visible, right? So that we might better know who we are. See the exhibit, it's amazing. It's touching if you haven't seen it already. And it is doing the work to insist on this sort of continuity. And with that, I'll leave you. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to thank the panel and for all of you for attending. And I just wanted to, I may have not said this, but really to thank my co-curator, Howard Oransky, on this wonderful journey. To Reza Acavino, also, and the Department of Art staff. It's been a real honor and a pleasure to have worked with you on this. It's, if you think about the amount of work, it's like climbing 3 Mount Kilimanjaros at once. It was really intense, but also rewarding. So wanted to also thank the panelists this afternoon for a wonderful presentation. And now we're open for a Q&A for about 5 or 6 minutes. Questions? There's got to be at least one question out there, right? No one has a comment, question? Oh, okay, yes, in the back, please.
I just feel like in 5 minutes, it might not be answered.
That's okay.
I am really impressed with my knowledge about Tibet. This is not food for Davu. I'm not from here. I'm from Philly. This is my 2nd month here. So I would love
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Personally, because I want to know more about some of the local Black Minnesotan artists, because I just feel like I am way out of my depth. And I love them.
Yeah, I was going to say hi after, because there's too much to say.
Do you need the mic? Need the mic? Okay.
Say hi after, there's too much to say. We got to introduce you to say too, though. All right? No, I mean, we're learning about ourselves right now, right? That's, I mean, there's generations before who carry memories that I haven't, I'm not party to yet. But I think we're learning a lot about ourselves right now. And I mean, there's been a light shine on the Twin Cities, right, last couple of years. And so, yeah, please, meet. Let's meet.
Did any of you want to add to?
You want to know about current Black artists in the Twin Cities? I couldn't hear the question completely.
Anything works. I would learn about everything. I mean,
Yes. Talk to Davu.
So she's new to the area and welcome, and she wants to learn more about what's, right.
Welcome. And also, you sound so open, and I think that's the best way to begin, because the history of creativity among artists in Minnesota, some of it is kept quiet, some of it is kept less quiet, some of it gets trumpeted, and and joy ahead for you and for the people you discover.
Anyone else? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you on behalf of everybody up here.
The floor is still, yes, Howard.
Well, I guess I don't have exactly a question, maybe it's more of a comment for Davu. So the photograph of your great aunt, as I understand it, is on the cover of that brochure. Yeah. So, that is such a beautiful image. Herman and I fell in love with it from the beginning. And I think we kind of knew that had to be on the cover of that brochure, because the brochure includes the playlist. And there she is with all her collection at the Hennepin County Library, and we had made this decision to put that on the cover, and it's in our book as well. I didn't want, so many of the Blanton photographs are captioned as untitled. The attributions, like here's so-and-so, and here's so-and-so, is fairly uneven. So I went through all of it. And there was another photograph in which I was pretty sure that she appeared, where there were some of the women in that photograph were named. And I activated my correspondence with Ted Hathaway at the library. And I said to him, look, we're going to put this in the book. I'm trying to figure out what is this woman's name. I found this other photograph. It looks like it's her. Is her name so-and-so? And he wrote back and said, no, sorry, that's not it. So we had to publish it as untitled, unfortunately. And
Several of the photos in Chandler's book is the same way. And one of the things I discovered when I was taking the book out after it was published, and Leroy King from King's was there with his walker, and elder community members were there. Everybody was going through and pointing and naming people. And we're saying, okay, the books are never finished. You were saying, and one carries over into the next. And so it's really just an opportunity to invite people to gather, to remember, and to identify names that have gone, unspoken for years. And so it sounds like the Hennepin County Libraries is doing the same. Aunt Joyce told me she went down there for an event that they had and was helpful in identifying people, but that's obviously a part of the process too. Exhibits and publications are only part of it, right?
yeah, so I guess what I'm wondering is, perhaps you would be willing to share some of the knowledge you have with the library so that they can more accurately caption some of these images, like that one, for example, for future use.
Sure.
I'll just add that the Martin Luther King Center in St. Paul has, pre-pandemic, was engaged in a project of 4 years of asking people to come and look at the photo archives and identify people. And that was continuing. I mean, sort of some people went every week, some people spent 4 hours a week there, some people came once, said, I know these 3 people, wrote it on a Post-it and walked away. But the effort is, of course, I think as most of us know from our own family albums, is open.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more. One more.
I have a question for
Yes.
you,
Go ahead.
who have walked through. I got so involved in Katherine E. Weems that there is a photograph by Davu Seru.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the name of it, but I call it the 14th century monks. And when you talked about work that references other work, I thought what he's doing in this photograph is the ennobling of ordinary black men in the way that Kehinde Wiley does it in paint.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't seen it or thought of it, I would recommend that to you. It was a startling thing. I thought, well, wait a minute, this is not paint, this is photograph, but the effort to see, to transfer to others that perception that he had of those men. I mean, I stayed and examined, oh, those are not fezzes they're wearing, that's a watch cap turned backwards. They were in their ordinary clothes, and yet they were photographed in a way that that whole ennoblement was very present. So,
Yes, that came from the Walker Art Center, Dower Bay, I think it was 1991 or somewhere in there. He shoots out of New York, but he does have a portraiture style of shooting youth and other people where they are. And then he can extract them, and that large the size that's the actual size of the negative that he actually uses. I mean, it's really, but he's a remarkable photographer who captures youth and other populations in their, as best as he can, in their natural environment, but he also puts them, and as you were saying, in another environment that forces you to basically look at them as like individuals that you have to really look at them as people as opposed to, something else, right? Is that it? Are we finished?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great job again.